These are the eyes of Myra Hindley, the most hated child murderer in British history. She was intensely controversial. This painting, made from stencils of children's handprints, provoked storms of outrage when it was first shown a few years ago. And when she died in November 2002, after 37 years in prison, she was still front-page headlines. She was the devil, the woman Britain loved to hate. She was so notorious that the name Myra has now fallen into almost total disuse. And even at her cremation, the media were waiting for her. What was it about Myra? Why did she behave like a monster? And was she really inhuman? In this program, we explore Myra, the making of a monster. Manchester in the 1960s. Myra Hindley was born in 1942 and grew up amongst the typical working-class terraces of the area. Factories stood against the skyline, and in the little two ups and two downs at the back lived the workers. As a teenager, the Catholic Church played an important part in Myra's life. She worshipped regularly here at the monastery of St. Francis, which loomed large in the life of the neighbourhood. She was neither bright nor backward, and went to the local secondary modern high school. There was no suggestion of anything abnormal in her upbringing.
There is nothing whatever in Myra Hindley's background that would predict that she would become a serial killer. You know, she's not known to have tortured animals. She was not kind of beaten and sexually abused routinely by both her parents. Nothing horrendous like that. Yes, there was, if you like, for her social class background, etc., you know, an average amount of problems. Her father is supposed to have hit her mother a bit, which is not uncommon at all in those days. You know, she was the eldest sister. Perhaps she got treated differently. Perhaps she did have some. I mean, I'm sure she did have some experiences of emotional deprivation and some experiences of mildly abusive maltreatment. But this is not what you find in the backgrounds of serial killers.
She did actually appear to be a perfectly normal girl, with the same aspirations as most of her friends. She wanted to get married, she wanted to have children, have a family. She was quite tough. I mean, those who played netball with her at school said she was definitely a toughie. She wasn't one who would give in easily. She was a leader. She accumulated girls around her. But she seemed in every possible way to be absolutely just the product of her time and place.
After leaving school, Myra Hindley did several jobs till eventually, in 1961, she became a secretary here at Millwoods Merchandising, a small factory. She was 19. Also working at the factory was a 23-year-old Glaswegian, Ian Brady. Myra fell in love with him.
He was actually a very good-looking chap in his early days. He also drove around on a motorbike, and he was rather different from everybody she'd ever met before. She actually said he was the first man she'd known who had clean fingernails, coming from a kind of solidly blue-collar background where everybody had manual jobs. That was perhaps true. She was attracted to his elusiveness. He would sit in the office reading strange books, and I mean really strange. He would read Mein Kampf and things like that. He was a pseudo-intellectual, and she was quite attracted to that. He was different, he was interesting, and even more important, he took very little notice of her. And like many young girls, she fell in love with a man who was being distant and unavailable, and of course that makes the passion a lot stronger. She became more and more desperate to attract his attention. She wrote this rather schoolgirlish diary at the time about, you know, he looked at me today and Ian was in a bad mood today. Rather silly little things, but she was very determined she was going to get her man, and he was the man she wanted.
And get her man she did. Ian and Myra became an item. Today, a world away from the rough streets of Manchester in the tranquility of rural Ireland, lives a man who was a key witness in the drama that became known as the Moors murders. He was Myra Hindley's brother-in-law, and apart from her and Brady, the only other person who actually saw one of the murders taking place. He became a central figure in the most infamous criminal case in 20th century British history. He has spoken only rarely about what he saw, but in this programme he will tell us the full story of what happened back then in the 1960s.
Brady, if you say he was 100% evil. He was every name you can put on him. He was them and more. But in all honesty, Brady slept with the devil, and that was her.
David Smith, Myra Hindley's brother-in-law, grew up in the same 1960s Manchester streets as Myra and her family.
The streets were innocent. What I mean by that is kids could come home from school. If mum and dad were out at work, it didn't matter. Neighbours were there. They could have a jam sandwich and disappear for a couple of hours. That wouldn't raise concern. That would not be a problem. This was just the way of the streets. They were safe. A nice place to come from and a nice place to be.
In the early 1960s, when he was 15, David Smith began going out with Myra Hindley's sister, Maureen.
Maureen was living with a mother and a father at 20 Eaton Street. Across the way, 2 minutes' walk would have been the grandmother's house. Myra was being looked after at the grandmother's house. At this stage now, I'm getting very close to Maureen, and I made her pregnant, and we married when I was 16. Up to me marrying Maureen, I had no social connection with Brady or Hindley, other than a nodding acquaintance.
But now the couples began making occasional trips together in Myra Hindley's car. On one early outing, Brady showed a hint of violence.
We was on a motorway, and a car had cut us up. The occupants were lads or what have you, and they were having a laugh. Brady took this totally wrong and decided Myra to overtake them, burn them off. So at high speed she did, and he did no more, a few empty wine bottles. He positioned himself at the back of our vehicle and just threw them at the car, aiming for the windscreen. This is the first time he shows any being irrational.
David and Maureen suffered a tragedy when their 6-month-old baby died. Myra Hindley's behaviour was further evidence of Brady's influence over her.
We showed her into the parlour, and it was an open coffin, and I think that she wasn't prepared for that. So, just for a few seconds, tears appeared in her eyes. That's all. I'm not over-elaborating this. It was seconds. And it had smudged the makeup under her eyes. She wore very dusty Springfield-type makeup under the eyes, very heavy black mascara-type eye makeup. And the watering of her eyes had made the makeup run. She quickly got a grip of herself, and then she was more concerned about if she went outside and Ian would notice that she'd showed emotion. And I've got to emphasise, it's only a few seconds of emotion, but she had to dry her eyes and clean her eyes before she returned back to the car.
This is Hattersley, a Manchester housing estate. In 1965, David Smith and Maureen moved here. Myra Hindley, her grandmother and Ian Brady had already moved to this row of houses in Wardlebrook Avenue. It was here Brady revealed more of his violent nature.
We started talking of petty crime, a situation of a robbery. Could we do this? Could we do that? And again, it's in a cloud of drink. I'm not excusing it. I'm not excusing anything. But it was all said through a cloud of drink. It's two blokes, very drunk, talking bravado and just waffling. This then changes into a more serious matter, and he produces guns. Now this, to me, at my stage of life now, I can look back and say, that impressed me. That impressed me. The simple fact that these were metal things. I'd never seen a gun before in my life. And all of a sudden there's a 45, there's a 38. These are big guns. And he's producing them and showing them to me.
Myra Hindley showed little interest in their talk of crime.
Occasionally she'd take part, but not comment very much as regards robberies. More, she would be talking to Maureen about girly talk. The girls would get bored and literally go to bed, go for a lie down, and leave us drinking, listening to big band music, Hitler tapes. A pretty bad atmosphere altogether, to be honest.
Matters came to an unexpected head here in Wardlebrook Avenue, one night in October 1965. Myra asked Dave, still only 17, to walk her home to collect some wine.
I go in the house. She takes me into the kitchen. To the right is the living room. Straight ahead is the kitchen. It's a very small house. To the left is a set of stairs. That is the entrance hall. Into the kitchen. She opens a drawer and she takes out, I don't know, 5, 6 miniature wine bottles. Puts them on the top of the cabinet. Excuse me. Wait here a minute. There's the wine. Then she goes into the living room. A minute passes, maybe 2 minutes, I don't know, a minute or so, very short time. All of a sudden, there's screaming, there's swearing, there's banging around. She screams, Dave, Dave, help him. I go running into the living room, and Brady's got this lad whacking him and whacking him and hitting him with an axe. It's very violent. Very, very violent. The lad is on the floor. Brady's still hitting him. I think at the trial he'd received 14 blows. It was very bad. He then strangles him. He's swearing at him. He's calling him. He's cursing him. He's calling him filthy names. And then it's over. It stops. I'm there. Hindley's there. And Brady's there. And everything has to be normal. I emphasise this. It has to be normal, or else I don't walk out of that house. Now, what steps are taken after that is purely leading up to me going out of that house. I don't care as long as I get out of that house. We wrap the body up. We carry the body upstairs. We come downstairs, and the three of us, mostly myself and Hindley, but Brady was part of it as well, cleaned up. He passes me the axe. Feel the weight of that. How did he take that? Feel the weight of that. Hindley sits down. There's a chair next to the fireplace. She says, I saw the blow register in his eyes. He never saw anything. He never knew anything. I saw the blow register in his eyes. It's a normal conversation. I know it sounds unbelievable. It's a normal conversation. If they'd have walked in with chocolate biscuits and tea, I would have stayed and drank tea and ate chocolate biscuits. I would have done anything just to get out of that house.
Myra Hindley appeared calm throughout.
She would pick bone and hair up off the floor and not have a problem with it. Just drop it in the bag. There was no, oh, would one of you pick that up? I don't want to. No, just straightforward. Just straightforward.
After the living room had been cleaned and tidied, Dave was finally able to go home in the small hours of the morning.
I was covered in blood. I went in. Maureen was in bed. I got her out of bed. I went to the bathroom and I absolutely vomited. To the point where I was retching and I was in a bad state, physically in a bad state. I then had to tell her what had happened. I've just seen somebody killed. Doesn't go into any great detail. Don't be looking for detail. There isn't. You just... how do you mean? So I'm showing her my clothes. Look at me. We've got to do something. We decide we're going to the police.
David Smith was taken to this nearby police station at Hyde in Manchester. There he told officers his terrifying story. Police went round to 16 Wardlebrook Avenue, where they found and removed the trussed-up body. They then arrested Brady, who was brought here for questioning. Later that morning, local journalist Clive Entwistle was plunged without warning into the biggest story of his career.
In 1965, I was a young reporter here in North Manchester, and on October 7th, I received a call, a tip-off from a police contact, that there'd been a murder on a council estate called Hattersley, just outside Hyde. I drove up to Hattersley and drove round and found a policeman standing on the doorway of number 16 Wardlebrook Avenue. It was part of this row now of 3, and the house was there at the end. It's since been knocked down. I talked to the policeman and he told me they'd found the body trussed up in polythene in the back bedroom. He told me that a man had been arrested. His girlfriend had been taken with her grandmother to the house at the back, the house you can see between the gap there. I went round, policewoman on the door. I went inside, there were some women in the kitchen, and in the front room was a blonde woman. I asked where was the young lady from the house at number 16, and they pointed to this blonde, and I went and sat down and started to talk to her. First of all, I asked her name, and she told me she was Myra Hindley. If you met Myra anywhere else but under the circumstances I did, if you met her in a pub with Ian, you'd have just thought, you know, attractive, slightly hard-looking blonde, fine, you know, nothing special at all. You wouldn't have really given her a second look. She had a lovely beehive haircut. On that morning, she was obviously very distressed. I didn't know and realise the implications of what she'd done.
The murder victim was a 17-year-old boy, Edward Evans. At first, police had no reason to think this was anything other than a routine one-off murder case. But Dave Smith had mentioned something that had happened in the afternoon before the murder.
At this stage, I had a few minor, petty things amongst my property. A starter pistol was one, a little bit of a kosh, and a few odds and ends. Brady, in the afternoon, asked me to bring this material round to his house. Yes, I did. Me thinking that it was in preparation of a robbery that would have taken place probably within a few days. This is what I'm thinking at the time. He then removes stuff out of his house and takes it away in a suitcase.
The police decided to check Manchester's railway stations. Clive Entwistle's father-in-law, a local policeman, was sent to search left luggage offices.
My father-in-law rang me at about midnight on the Saturday night, the following Saturday, to say that he'd been asked to go and look for a suitcase belonging to a guy called Ian Brady. He'd no idea why. And he went through all 5 left luggage offices at railway stations in Manchester. And in Central Station, he found a suitcase belonging to Ian Brady. In that suitcase was a income tax return, which in the name of Brady, so he knew he got the right suitcase. Also, they found a number of things, a number of books, a copy of the Marquis de Sade. But the most important thing was this 1/4-inch tape, reel-to-reel tape. Dennis played it, not realising what it was, and on it was this little girl screaming for her mother.
It was a recording of a terrified and pleading child being pornographically photographed, and possibly worse. These photographs were also in the suitcase. The little girl was soon identified as a missing 10-year-old, Leslie Ann Downey. In one of Brady's notebooks, they found the name of another missing child, 12-year-old John Kilbride. This immediately suggested Edward Evans may not have been the only murder victim. A few days later, police brought Myra Hindley to Hyde Police Station and arrested her as well. They took this photograph of her for police records. Few could have imagined then that it would eventually become one of the most haunting images of 20th century Britain.
When that picture was published, that was the first picture anybody had seen of Myra Hindley, and it suddenly saw this picture of Brady, the two of them just covering the whole of the front pages. It was a pretty impactful front page, and that remained the dominant image, even though, of course, over the years there were many other pictures of her looking more ordinary. But that, with the great peroxide beehive haircut and those blank staring eyes, was a pretty impressive picture.
Despite suspecting several murders, the police had no bodies. What could Hindley and Brady have done with them? In the house were many photos of the couple on the moors. This is Hollingbrook Knoll on Saddleworth Moor, It was known to be a favourite spot of the couple's and featured in many of their photos. Police began searching here. They now had a horrible suspicion that the couple might have buried the bodies somewhere in this area, but it was like looking for a needle in a haystack.
I mean, how do you find a body? You know, a group of police cadets and young police officers had been searching on the side of Mottram Road on a Saturday afternoon, about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and I was with them, and we'd been down to the local pub, the Clarence, and had a pint or two, and then gone back and sun setting. And one of the officers needed a pee, so he walked over the top of the hill. And on the way back, he noticed a piece of white bone sticking out of the ground. Now, this guy, Bob Spears, had been a police officer for only a few weeks. And God bless his cotton socks, he stood on the top of the hillside with the sergeant swearing at him to tell him to get down because they all wanted to go home. And Spears stood his ground. So they all trudged up angrily, and he pointed out this bone, and they parted the peat and let the water drain away, and there was the forearm with still part of the dress on of Leslie and Downey. And if it hadn't been for that, if they hadn't found them the body on that particular day, then the search in the next few days would have been totally called off. When I went back that night, because I'd left early, I had left before Spears found the body. When I went back that night, it was out of a Hitchcock film. The mist had closed in, there were old-fashioned arc lights, and it was eerie, absolutely eerie. And you've got silhouetted figures standing over a small mound where they'd excavated Leslie's body. And when I arrived, it was at the moment just before they'd put the remains into a polythene, big black polythene sheet. In those days, they didn't have body bags. And so it was carried down by these officers, 4 officers, holding it up like this, as if it was a bouquet of flowers, you know. And I stood on the back bumper of the Black Maria to get a better view. And as they came towards me, they then reached up to put the remains into the back of the Black Maria. And as they did it, of course, as they leaned up, they all pulled it open to lift it in. And I looked in and saw Leslie's remains.
There was only one possible conclusion. This was no longer a single murder. It almost certainly involved the killing of several children. Children whose bodies were buried in the loneliest, bleakest of all places, the moors. The Moors murders were now destined to occupy a place of special horror in the British psyche.
Think about it.
I can recall to this day the images that I saw of Leslie's remains being lifted into the back of that Black Maria. It's an image along with the tape, which I shall take to my grave with me.
The discovery of Leslie Ann Downey's body and the existence of the tape recording directly implicated Myra Hindley in the murder. Her voice was on the tape recording. Her fingerprints were on the photographs of the little girl. She was in the photos on the moors. Now police believed John Kilbride's body might be somewhere on the moors too. They used a photo of Myra Hindley on the moors to work out a possible location, and sure enough found his body. John Kilbride's funeral was a huge public event. The Moors murders excited tremendous interest, and some people saw it as a comment on the Times.
You know, I can remember, you read the papers and it was full of mini-skirts and excitement of people having sex and drugs all over the place, and obviously rock music, and sex and drugs and rock and roll was the order of the day. And I think there was that feeling that if everybody's allowed to just do whatever they want, if the animal within is unleashed, look what will happen. Society will fall apart. Ghastly things like this will start happening.
Brady and Hindley's trial began 6 months later in April 1966. David Smith, accompanied by Myra Hindley's sister Maureen, was the main prosecution witness. The still young medium of television helped to feed the public appetite for news about it.
This trial is certain to make legal history, if only because the Attorney General himself is here leading for the prosecution. It's taking place in Chester Castle. Originally,
Tom St. John Barry's nightly ITN bulletins reported all the details.
Fantastic security precautions have been taken, and the precincts of the court have been very widely defined. Before you can get into the court, you have to produce no less than 3 passes if you're a mere journalist. When you do get in, you find yourself in a long, very high room, about 25 feet high, wood-panelled for about 12 feet, and then light stone arches Above that, a wooden roof with a stained glass light in it.
As the trial unfolded, it became clear that Myra Hindley was going to stand by Brady, come what may.
Hindley, who said that she had a sore throat, gave her evidence in a low, husky voice. She said that she had loved Brady and still loved him. When she was cross-examined about her part in the nude photographing session with the child, Leslie Ann Downey, she said, "I offer no defence for that. It was indefensible and cruel." She said she didn't know that Brady was tape recording the session and that she was ashamed when she heard the tape played later.
It was this tape recording that really caused a sensation.
People were absolutely riveted by it. To see this story of a young man and a young woman, a girl of only 18, apparently doing horrific crimes. But even then, it didn't take off, really, until the tapes were revealed. And that is what I think has been the driving force of the Moors murder. I mean, the Moors themselves, of course, produced a fantastic background to such evil. And but the tapes were the thing that finally sold it.
When it was played in court, it was played to an absolute packed but hushed courtroom. You could have heard a pin drop. And as it was played, you could see grown men, tears welling up in their eyes. I mean, it was horrific because it wasn't so much what was on the tape, it was what you imagined and knew was happening to that little girl.
Brady was convicted of 3 murders, Hindley of 2. By an astonishing piece of luck, they escaped being hanged only because hanging had been abolished a month after their arrest. As a result, they were both sentenced to life imprisonment.
These were 3 calculated, cruel and cold-blooded murders, was what Mr. Justice Fenton Atkinson said, and I passed the only sentence the law allows. After sentences, he praised the police investigation of the utmost skill and thoroughness which brought these matters to light. Outside, a small crowd of sightseers, most of them staff from the neighbouring county council officers, gathered in the courtyard of the castle to see the prisoners removed. Then the police cleared the forecourt, and as a van with 2 white police cars escorting it swept through the archway of the castle, there was booing from a crowd which had gathered outside. The duration of their imprisonment is now entirely at the discretion of the Home Secretary. The Home Office said tonight that a life sentence means just what it says. Normal practice nowadays is to release a life prisoner on licence after about 10 years. In some recent cases, judges have recommended that the sentences they passed should not be reviewed for a certain set period, but no such recommendation was made in either case today.
Myra Hindley was taken to Holloway Prison in North London. She never saw Brady again. Even before the trial, there'd been suspicions she and Brady had murdered other children. It was to be a very long time, 20 years in fact, before those suspicions were confirmed. Throughout all that time, Hindley and Brady flatly denied there'd been any other murders. Normally, prisoners disappear from view, but not in Myra Hindley's case. Throughout subsequent years, the public and press remained fixated on her.
I think the endless fascination with her was that she was an ordinary girl from an ordinary working-class background who did the most extraordinary, horrible things, and we can't explain her, and that is why she still haunts us.
She flew in the face of all our preconceptions about women. Women are nurturing, women are kind, women like children. Men, on the other hand, can be cruel, can be tough, can be whatever. She flew in the face of all that. She also, at her trial, maintained that very hard, resolute front. She didn't portray herself as soft at all. In fact, I've always maintained that if Myra Hindley had played her trial differently, she would probably have been out after about 7 years. I mean, she could have played the part of his acolyte and very much under his thumb, and she could have played a very soft and remorseful role at that trial. But she didn't. She was stony-faced, she was tough, she was hard. There was the famous police photograph of her with the blonde hair, staring straight to the camera, looking tough, looking hard. And that's how she became remembered and known. And she became a figure for universal hatred. Much more than Ian Brady, interestingly, who is just perceived as perhaps, a rather sad, mad, evil man.
Incessant press interest kept Myra Hindley in the public eye. An early story was the extraordinary case of the governor of Holloway taking her for a walk on Hampstead Heath.
Dorothy Wing was the governor of Holloway, and she, like so many people in Myra's life, was seduced by Myra in the sense that she came to believe that Myra was an interesting, intelligent and better person than her crimes would suggest, and she wanted to improve her life. And this happened to the extent that she actually took her out for a walk on Hampstead Heath with her dog. I think it was perfectly innocent on Dorothy Wing's part, but it was a really foolish and foolhardy thing to do with such a celebrity prisoner.
Another episode in the Myra Hindley saga was a full-blown escape attempt. This was made doubly lurid by the revelation that Myra Hindley was now having a lesbian relationship with a prison officer who had tried to free her.
Pat Kearns was a prison officer. She was a lesbian. She was actually living with another prison officer at the time. She came to work on the wing where Myra was, and she ruffled the feathers of all the girls, and Myra fancied her and fell in love with her straight away, and this became an ongoing love affair. Notes were smuggled between the two. They had secret meetings in the chapel. They had secret little snogging sessions here and there, and eventually a plot was hatched that they would actually spring Myra Hindley from prison. It sounds bizarre, but it was quite an advanced plot. Casts were made of keys, plans were made, everything was afoot, and then one of the women who was involved as a go-between actually shot them.
But even though her actions suggested a lack of remorse, many who met Myra Hindley spoke well of her.
I found her a nice person.
Was she generally well accepted in the jail? I don't suppose everybody felt the way you
Well,
did.
no, not everybody felt the way I did. You can expect that in a community with women, you know? It's mostly the short sentences that used to want to fight her, argue with her, you know, and call her names.
So she sometimes had a rough time of it?
Oh, yeah, when she first went there, she had a very rough time. You know, she got beaten up.
Said by people who've been to see her that she's changed a great deal since she's been in Holloway. Did you see any sign of that?
When I went in there, to me, she didn't look the same as what the papers made out her to be.
What do you mean physically? I mean, her photograph in the papers doesn't look...
Oh, no, you wouldn't recognise her. She's a different person altogether. She is a very friendly person if you only give her the chance to be friendly to you.
As the years passed, Myra Hindley studied for an Open University degree and renewed her involvement with Catholicism. Lord Longford, a former government minister and well-known prison reformer, famously became convinced of her repentance and campaigned for her release.
I've known her for 8 years, and I think I've seen her every 3 months for 8 years, and so I know her better than I know most criminals. And if I'm going to have an opinion at all, I would feel sure that she wouldn't do any harm to anybody. And I don't know anybody who's known her in the course of that 8 years who thinks she would do any harm to anybody if she came out. But the people who say she ought to be there forever are people who say, in view of the terrible crimes she was associated with, life ought to mean life. That's a different point of view, but I'm rejecting that as totally un-Christian.
Although disguised to protect her anonymity, Myra Hindley's sister Maureen also spoke up for her.
Do you think that she can be treated as if she were in exactly the same category as other people serving life sentences?
Yes, I think she could now. Now that she's severed herself away from Ian Brader, yeah. It's a long time since she's wrote to him. It's a long time since she's had any connections with him. And I feel now that she's... I feel that it's not my personal opinion, but I feel that if she was like that tomorrow, she would never consider it. If she had never got involved with him, she would just be an ordinary housewife.
A decade later, Lord Longford was still arguing Hindley's case.
She's not led an isolated life, really, because she's done very well. She's got her Open University degree, a pass degree, and then an honours degree, and a good many people have come to know her and like her very much, so I should say she was completely ready. She has been for years, if it comes to that.
But the families of Myra Hindley's victims did their best to stop any such idea.
She's ruined my life, and she's ruined 5 more families. And then people are suffering like me, and it's a sentence for me alone.
That woman will not live if she comes out of prison. I know people have said they'll do it for me. I don't want that. I don't want nobody to get in trouble, especially my boys. They've got their lives to live. I'm half dead now. I'm living on pills. I will willingly do that woman in and take my punishment, and I will expect to be put in prison where I should stay until the end of my days.
And so controversy kept Myra Hindley in the public eye well into the mid-1980s. 20 years after her original conviction. But of course few had ever seen her since then, and those who did found it a shock. At that time, writer Peter Stanford was editor of the Catholic Herald. Through Lord Longford, he became interested in Myra Hindley's case and began the first of many visits to her.
Women's prisons are very mixed. You'll have women in there who haven't paid their TV licences and women in there who are mass murderers, all kind of mixed in together. And so you're sitting in the waiting room and the names are all called out and all these kind of grannies and children of these poor women kind of go in to see everybody. And I suppose naively I was waiting for someone to say Hindley. And no one did. And in the end I was the only person left sitting in the waiting room, and the prison officer came over and said, "Have you come to see Myra Hindley?" And I said yes, so I'm not quite sure what the reaction was going to be, really. And so they showed me through into the visiting room. And, I looked around the room for a woman with blonde hair and a stern, unbending expression, and there was no one there who fitted the description. And in the end, someone ushered me towards, I suppose I could have worked it out because it was the only empty table. And the woman sitting on the other side, I mean, you just wouldn't have recognised her from the photograph. And I think that's one of the very important things about Myra, in that most people believed that she was completely unchanged from that particular image in the mid-1960s. And, here we were over 20 years later, and, surprise, surprise, she changed. She was a different person. What was she like? She was very, very pale. Her face was very veined. I mean, she didn't look at all well. She had ready,
purpley hair, I think, the first time I met her, which was cut in a bit of a sort of 1970s cut. She had an extraordinary voice. Her voice was very... She spoke very, very slowly and had quite a deep voice. She smoked like a chimney. She consumed chocolate quite a lot. They have this thing where you bought chocolate from the kind of... the trolley and handed it out. So all those things. I mean, in many ways, very normal. It was almost that thing you had to kind of sit there and kind of pinch yourself and thinking, I am now sitting opposite the woman that the tabloid newspapers tell me is the most wicked woman ever to have lived. And you'd be having a perfectly normal conversation about a television programme you'd watched or a book you'd read, or I remember she was fascinated by Margaret Thatcher, talking to her about politics and Margaret Thatcher, in the same way that you talk to anybody.
In 1986 came the next big breakthrough in the Moors murders case. Ian Brady began to talk about additional murders. The new head of CID at the Greater Manchester Police, Chief Inspector Peter Topping, interviewed Brady and also approached Myra Hindley at Cookhamwood Prison in Kent.
I received a phone call one afternoon from Myra saying the Greater Manchester Police are here and they want me to help them recover bodies that have so far not been discovered on the moors, and I've agreed to help them. Would you come down to the prison straight away? So I got on a train down to the prison, and when I arrived, the prison gates were ringed by journalists with cameras and TV crews, so they'd obviously been alerted to the visit by the police. And when I went inside the prison, Myra was with Mr. Topping and his assistant, Mr. Knupfler. There were maps and plans all over the room, and they'd been poring over them.
Then a statement in Hindley's own words, read by her solicitor.
I've agreed to help the Manchester Police in any way possible, and have today identified from photographs and maps places that I know were of particular interest to Ian Brady, some of which I visited with him. In spite of 22 years' passage of time, I have searched my heart and memory and given whatever help I can to the police.
A complex logistical operation was now set in motion. A month later, Myra Hindley was taken back to the moors for the first time in 20 years, accompanied by her solicitor.
I was collected and taken to a caravan up on the moors where I met Myra. She had been taken from Cookhamwood the day before and had slept the night in a police training college somewhere in the Midlands. And I remember she was all excited because for the first time in years she'd been in a double bed, and for the first time in her life she'd slept under a duvet, which she found extremely strange. And so the day began. We'd agreed I would be with her throughout. Mr. Topping was there, Mr. Knupfler was there, several officers were there. A man from the Home Office was there to witness the proceedings, and there were police round and about with rifles. You could see their silhouettes on the skyline, just making sure that no intruders tried to have a go at us, or her in particular. That was a big fear. The sky was full of helicopters, press helicopters, who had got word that we were up there, and they came down very, very close. It was snowing, and so the snowflakes were being whisked up into our faces, and it was all rather frightening at times, because they were trying to get it as close as possible to Myra to get the best pictures of her.
The police were trying to find the grave of a missing 10-year-old boy, Keith Bennett. They also wanted Myra Hindley to help them find the grave of a missing teenager, Pauline Reed.
Right towards the end of the day, it was getting very dark. It was close to the grave of the former grave of Leslie Ann Downey, and when we walked close to it, she pointed in the general direction of where she thought Pauline Reed's grave was, and advised Mr. Topping to dig in that direction over there.
Some months later, police did find the body in the area Myra Hindley had indicated.
A quarter of a century after they found the body of 10-year-old Leslie Ann Downey near this bleak spot on Saddleworth Moor, police found a third apparent victim of the Moor's murderers.
Pauline Reed's funeral was a reminder of the events and places that had figured prominently in the news 20 years before.
Mrs. Joan Reed, who left hospital for the day to attend the funeral, led the mourners with her husband Amos. For 24 painful years they've waited for this day, when they could at last give their daughter the dignity of a Christian burial. As the cortege made its way through the Gorton area of Manchester, neighbours stood silently in memory of Pauline. Among the mourners today was Detective Chief Superintendent Peter Topping, seen here with the father of John Kilbride, another Moors victim.
Myra Hindley had known Pauline, and they had both worshipped here at St. Francis. By a sad irony, it was from here that Pauline was now committed for burial.
At the graveside, the mother of Leslie Ann Downey, yet another child murdered on the moors.
More than 2 decades after her death, Pauline Reed's family were at last able to lay their daughter to rest. The closing chapter of her tragic life had finally been written. Although Myra Hindley had helped police identify likely spots on the moors, she hadn't formally admitted to involvement in any additional murders. But now she decided to confess all to Chief Inspector Topping.
We waited until it died down completely, several weeks, and then we met over a period of about a week, every day, at Cookham Wood, and there were a series of tape-recorded interviews where Mr. Topping would ask Myra questions and she would give her account of the deaths of the various children and the role that she played in them. And I was present throughout with the Reverend Peter Timms.
The Reverend Peter Timms was a former governor of Maidstone Prison and a therapist who'd been counselling Myra Hindley for 4 years.
She said to me, well, I'll see Mr. Topping if you're there. I said, well, that's for the police to decide. I can't be there unless they decide, but of course I'll sit with you if that's what you want, and I did. And so there were 2 days of informal interviews, no tapes, nothing. Right? It was just chatting with the police for 2 days. Now, you cover a lot of material in 2 days, actually. And she was absolutely open and honest, and nothing that she said in those 2 days was any different to what I already knew. Right? And at the end of those 2 days, the policemen, it was 5 o'clock or something, they went off to their hotel and they were going back home. And I got a telephone call that evening from the governor, and she spoke to me and said, could you get Mr. Topping to come back? I want to go on record. I should have done this 20-odd years ago. It's time, it's much too long now. And I tried to dissuade her. I said, look, you need to think about it a bit longer. Take longer to think about it. But she wouldn't. She said no. So the following morning, I got hold of the police and said, and she was read the caution.
She's confessed that she is guilty of participating in these crimes, so that she would be guilty of the crime of murder, yes.
Brady himself was also taken up to the moors to see if he could help pinpoint Keith Bennett's body, which still hadn't been found. But he couldn't find it either. After this, there were no more breakthroughs or discoveries in the Moors murders case. But controversy would continue to dog Myra Hindley, right up until her own death 16 years later. The controversy really revolves around why she committed these terrible crimes. One thing everyone agrees on is that Brady was the catalyst.
Had they never met, I don't believe Myra Hindley would ever have committed murder. I don't think there was any interest in it or impetus towards it in her. She was a very tough person and quite capable of violence. And quite capable eventually of accepting violence, which I think a lot of people would not be capable of. So there was some inherent ability to cope with it, with the violence and the killing in her, but she had no feeling or need to be involved in that, and he did.
No, she wouldn't have killed. I doubt very much if she'd have killed. Almost convinced that she wouldn't have killed. No.
She would have grown up, she would have had a family, she would have married, had 3 kids. She would probably be boss of the typing pool and run it with a rod of iron. That's the sort of person she was, but she would never have committed a crime, she would have never been involved in crime.
But it's why she did get involved that really divides people. One group sees her as led by Brady.
The reason she got involved was because she met Brady, she fell in love with him, and when you fall in love with someone, as we all know, it's the same for all of us, if you do fall in love, your barriers break down. Your sense of who you are and who the other person is become terribly muddled up. There's a period during the in-love bit of the relationship when that the other person can do nothing wrong, where you long to be in their company at all times. Basically, you lose the plot when you fall in love with someone. And she happened to fall in love with someone whose ideas she identified with, who she became terribly involved with, just as we all do with the people we fall in love with, but who, unfortunately, turned out to be Brady.
Quite how she herself got sucked in is very interesting. By degrees, I think, is the answer. He inculcated her into the almost cult of killing that he'd established, and he tried later on to do the same with David Smith. He gave her things to read. He gave her the Marquis de Sade to read. He talked to her about sadomasochism. He took her to see very strange films. They actually went to see a film of the Nuremberg rallies. He thought that anything to do with the Nazis was wonderful. She was still totally enamoured. He was this amazing, interesting, different person, not at all like the boy she knew who, wanted to be Elvis Presley and a quick kiss behind the dance hall afterwards. He was something else entirely. So Myra was still enjoying this feeling of being different and being special, and he worked on that, and that is how, by degrees, she came to believe that anything that Ian wanted her to do was right and worth doing. And she became his, interestingly, he called her Hessie. This was partly because of Myra Hess, the pianist, her name Myra, but more appropriately, Rudolf Hess was Hitler's lieutenant, and she was his lieutenant, and he saw her as the person who would help him fulfill this dream of committing murder.
The process by which you go from being Myra Hindley, a perfectly normal office worker, to Myra Hindley, the torturer of children, is not obviously something that happens overnight. In her case, she fell in love with this sadistically dangerous man, and gradually was groomed into more and more perverse sexual practices. First of all, with him, he played games with her, he tricked her, she got turned on by that. And I'm sorry, but we all, think of your own sex life and think how much game playing. I'm not talking about dressing up as a giraffe or doing weird and wonderful things. I'm talking about the normal playfulness that's involved in sex and the dominance and submission that's involved in normal sex. Now, if you think of that and just add a little bit of sadism, add a little bit of cruelty, etc., etc., Brady will have gradually groomed her into getting used to the idea that this was really exciting, this is what we want to do, and, if you like, taught her to get involved.
In the first murder, when she screamed and shouted and so on, he hit her and knocked her to the ground and said that effectively he would kill her if she didn't shut up. And she probably, well, I know, she thought, well, there's been this awful event but it will never happen again. It's one of the things, never happen again. And of course, it didn't happen again for about a year. Then it did happen. But it's then what you do about it.
But many people don't accept this idea of Myra Hindley as essentially passive. They see her as an active participant who was fundamentally just evil.
I mean, she went through each of the cases themselves, and it was the same old story about her being intimidated, infatuated, hopelessly in love with Ian Brady and would have done anything. I mean, I can understand that to some extent. I mean, if you look back over history, history's littered with examples of where females have done anything for their man. But surely there must, you have to draw a line. And while she may not have really understood what she did before she did it the first time, it's inconceivable that she didn't know the next time she went out in that car to lure a child, that she didn't know exactly what was going to happen to that child. And in effect, she was the one that sought out the child. She was the one, not Brady, it was her that went out and identified which child she was going to lure back to that car. So in effect, she, for me, was the more evil of the two, because had she not done that, then of course I don't think the horrors that we've all come to know as the Moors murder may not have taken place.
I think they were a pair of bloody kinky bastards together. That literally, bloody whipped each other, slapped each other, did all the dirty little things that were in the books, and then had to look for something else. And they just pushed and pushed and pushed. They broke all the rules. They didn't just break the legal laws, they broke all the moral laws. You don't break the moral laws, you don't. They're there for everybody. You don't just disregard them and kick them out. They did. They did. They didn't give a damn about the legal laws. They didn't give a damn about the moral laws. The things that hold us all together, the things that make us mum and dad, man and woman. They didn't give a damn about any of that. They thought they were entitled, both of them thought they were entitled to do exactly what they wanted to do. As obscene, the word obscene doesn't cover it. It really doesn't cover it. I can't let my imagination go that deep.
When you meet a female who's so out of touch with her emotions as a woman, that she does those kind of things, and not just once, but does it 5 times over a 2-3 year period, then I think that people are entitled to say, no, that she was evil.
Mark Leach also inclines to the widely held view that she was never genuinely remorseful.
She said that she was remorseful, but I saw no signs of that. I mean, there was no tear in her eye, there was nothing. I mean, simply repeating by rote, yes, I'm sorry, I did it, I shouldn't have done that. It didn't break any ice with me, I have to say. And I've met people in prison who are genuinely remorseful for what they have done, genuinely, and I mean that, genuinely remorseful.
She would say very clearly that he couldn't have done it without her, that she lured the children, that she knew exactly what he was doing, that often she joined in that, and that at any stage she could have stopped him, she could have stopped him, she could have shocked him. Those thoughts constantly went through her mind, and a constant process of reflection as to how she got in that situation. And what came over very, very strongly in those conversations was her remorse.
Her detractors also saw her as manipulative, especially in getting privileges in prison.
I think she was very calculating and very able to manipulate management inside a prison, because she knew that whatever she did would attract media attention.
She didn't lead a life. She wasn't laughing her head off at the public. She was a sad person. I spent many hours with her, and they were nearly all sad hours. She was a deeply sad and depressed person. She wasn't enjoying herself in prison, in a luxurious cell, and insofar as she may or may not have had lesbian relationships, well, that's nothing unusual in a woman's prison, I can assure you. There was a photograph of her when she was smiling that the Sun got hold of. I think it was when she was awarded her degree in the humanities. She was smiling. She'd just been awarded a degree.
she shouldn't have smiled for the camera ever, but because the public got the impression that she believed her crimes were funny. Well, she didn't. Nobody did. She was concerned for those who were close to her, as any normal person is, particularly her mother. That was her greatest concern, how her mother would react to anything that happened. After that, her close friends. She appeared to me, apart from her reputation and her history, to be a normal person, not an evil genius. Perhaps I knew her better than the editors and journalists in some of the tabloid newspapers. I did know her better. Longford, bless him, used to say, well, how do they know? They don't know her. Well, he was right about that.
But Myra Hindley and what she represented never lost the power to cause outrage. As recently as 1997, this painting, made up from stencils of children's handprints, was physically attacked and provoked public protests when it was featured in a high-profile exhibition.
This work was actually painted in 1995. Charles Saatchi bought it and showed it in his North London galleries. But it was when, in 1997, it was included in an exhibition called Sensation, which was Saatchi's collection of British art in the 90s up to that point, at the Royal Academy of Arts, no less. Suddenly, all hell was let loose, because the tabloids had been sniffing around for a kind of shock story surrounding British art. So we had the sharks, the elephant dung, and so on. This was there, and because it was an image of an horrendous serial killer, it gave a kind of moral dimension to their anger and their ire. And so, having interviewed the parents of some of Hindley and Brady's victims, who quite understandably were very disturbed by the fact that the image of Hindley was getting more publicity, there was a kind of public sense of outrage.
£7 to go into that exhibition is blood money. If you have any compassion for a mother who spent 33 years looking for the body of her child, do not pay your £7 to go and see this disgusting thing that they are calling art. It is not art, it is glorifying murder.
The point of art is to be controversial and to make people think differently. But, I mean, I've got my reservations about that particular piece.
I think it's sick how they can just make someone famous after killing people and put her picture up in a gallery when she's killed so many, like, these children.
But some feel the painting, now in London's Saatchi Gallery, provides fresh insight into Myra Hindley's crimes.
It's a gigantic image. It's about 15 feet tall, so when you stand in front of it, it actually overwhelms you. It becomes larger than life, or perhaps larger than death in this case. And normally when you see the image of Myra, from which this is based, it's about this big, and it's on the front cover of a newspaper. And you study that image of Myra Hindley and try and make sense of why that face, why that woman could do what she did. How is that possible? And you end up staring into the eyes, which seem absolutely empty. But in the end, what you see are these little tiny pixelated dots, because that's how newspaper images are made. When you stand in front of this, you realise that the dots have been replaced by the stenciled hands of children. And that's very interesting on a number of levels, because it's as if Marcus Harvey, the painter, is letting children reclaim the image of a woman who's responsible for killing 5 of them, torturing 5 of them. But also, it reminds us that we can never look at Hindley's face without that veil of depravity in front of it as to what she's done.
And David Smith also finds the famous image of Myra Hindley eternally chilling.
I've always had this feeling. The photograph of Hindley, to me, that is Myra Hindley. That is the real Hindley. Not some photograph taken inside a prison, surrounded with cuddly toys and smiling sweetly into a camera. That is not the real Myra Hindley. That photo, the police photograph that was taken on her arrest, that is the real Myra Hindley. You look at this photograph of Hindley, you see the hard case of Hindley. You see the hard jawline. You see the haircut. You don't see arrogance. You don't see fear. She's not frightened. But look at the eyes. Look right into them eyes on that photograph. They're bottomless. They're empty. There's not a spark in them eyes. And that's what makes that photograph for me the Myra Hindley that I know.
In 2002, without ever achieving the freedom she and her supporters hoped for. On the issue of whether she should ever have been released, as with so many other issues, she still has the power to divide opinion.
Life sentence is a justifiable sentence, life for life.
You can say it's been many years, but she did commit the crimes.
Yes, I think the life sentence was right in that situation, yeah.
Unfortunately, I do. I don't know whether that's just because I'm a mother and find the crime so heinous, or whether I think that a life sentence should be a life sentence.
she should have had the same opportunity as other prisoners get parole.
Just to say that, well, she committed these crimes and therefore she's going to stay evil the rest of her life is a bit kind of narrow-minded, I think. You know, she's obviously had a hell of a long time to think about what she's done.
She wasn't a threat to anybody beyond a certain point, I think, and I think that she should have been released maybe under supervision. I mean, isn't the whole sort of justice thing about trying to rehabilitate people?
I think she should never have been released.
I think she should have been kept in prison for life. She killed children. She killed many children.
A life for a life, you know. She shouldn't have killed, simple as that.
Our abiding interest in Myra Hindley is perhaps understandable. We are and always have been fascinated by acts of extreme evil. Yet the continuing media portrayal of her as a demon, inhuman and utterly different from ourselves, may conceal an uncomfortable truth.
A lot of people will look at Hindley and they'll say, look, she had responsibility for this. Her brother-in-law witnessed one of the murders and immediately went and phoned the police. Why in God's name didn't she? If there wasn't something fundamentally flawed about her, why didn't she do what her normal brother-in-law did? And of course, there's a very, very simple answer to that. Think of Nazi Germany in 1933, 1934, 1935. As people gradually got sucked into the Nazi fantasy, they gradually found themselves perfectly normal people, completely mentally healthy people who had perfectly good early childhoods or perfectly good genes and had nothing spiritually wrong with them whatsoever, no evil within them, found themselves murdering Jews. 6 million of them.
I think, you know, as a society, we needed to see her as a very abnormal, vicious, hard woman. She clearly wasn't that. She really wasn't. She was an intelligent, interesting, somewhat manipulative, somewhat tough, but nonetheless no tougher than, you know, any woman who's running an office anywhere in this country. We needed to see her as different because there is a fear in all of us that perhaps we are capable of great evil given the situation.
Even after her death, Myra Hindley's actions continue to blight lives. David Smith and others are still affected by what she did.
Dave Smith became a pariah after Myra Hindley and Ian Brady were arrested, and the evidence began to come out at the committal about what they'd actually done. People believed that he couldn't be innocent, that there was no way he was not implicated in the murder of Edward Evans, and subsequently, as a result, that he must have been involved in the abduction and murder of children. He went through an appalling time. He didn't go out. If he did go out, he was beaten up, he was attacked, he was spat at, he couldn't get a job. He had an appalling time, and in fact, you know, fled the area for a long time, but still, people pursued him. As soon as people knew who he was, they went for him because they believed he was as guilty as Myra Hindley and Ian Brady, and he wasn't. Dave Smith was actually a very brave, along with his wife Maureen, very brave and public-spirited person.
To term me as a victim of a Moors murder case victim is wrong. No, that's the parents. They're the victims. Them I bleed for. I'm a survivor. I survived it. I am not a victim of it. I got through it. Lots of the parents, they're frozen in time. Their memories stopped in the 60s. They still see their missing children, same size. They never grew. They never got older. They never change. They're the victims.
Winnie Johnson is the mother of Keith Bennett, whose body has never been found.
I don't like the idea of being him up there. I want him on where I can bury him myself and go to his grave. I mean, it's a long way to go to the Moors. They even asked me to have a memorial put up there to show people that he's up there. I said, you don't need a memorial. I said, people know that he is up there. And I said, putting a memorial up there is just a waste of time. I said, because for one thing, you don't know where he's murdered. They said, well, we'd put it on the edge of the road so the people could... I said, that's no good to me. And then I started taking flowers up each Christmas, Easter, his birthday, his anniversary, and I've done it from there on in. And it's cost me loads of money, but I appreciate it. And when I go up there, I've got an awful feeling of being happy. I don't know why. I could stay up there for a week or more because I know he's there. Whether that is because he's there or not, I don't know. I feel happy when I'm up there. I feel I'm top of the world. I only wish I could get him back.
Many of the people involved in the Moors murders case are now dead. Maureen Smith, Lord Longford, and of course Myra Hindley herself. Even after her death, Monster Myra lives on. Will she ever die?